You're listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
Adriana McKinnon, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to come today and talk to you.
Well, I'm excited to have you on, and I'm very thankful for you being here. You are the CEO of Youth Center Texas, is that correct?
Yes, I am the president and CEO of Youth Center of Texas. Youth Center of Texas, our Sunflower Home, we are a residential transitional facility in San Antonio, specifically housing female survivors of sex trafficking.
And how long has the facility been open?
Since 2020,
Okay.
has been operating.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And how many I guess young girls can you guys house in that facility?
So we have a 8-bed capacity right now for residential survivors ages 18 to 22. And we also offer a continuum of services for survivors after we transition them into independent living. We offer them still services until they are 24.
Oh wow! Okay, good. Mm-hmm. And what kind of I guess services outside of housing do they get from you guys when they come see you?
So yes, so besides offering them a safe place to live, we also offer many different services on site, long-term case management. We also offer individual counseling, group counseling, life skill training, social skills training. We also offer wellness classes, financial literacy classes. Let's see, just an array of different services, just to mention some. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so explain to me how these girls come to you guys. Is it do they have to be recommended to you guys, or is it something where you get involved immediately after they've been rescued, or how do they come to you guys?
We operate as a transitional residential facility, and so we work by referral. Right now, we receive referrals from the Juvenile Justice Department. We also receive referrals from CPS and foster care, but also from residential treatment centers, psych hospital, and also other community partners in San Antonio.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So 8 beds sounds like you guys have room to grow.
Yes.
Because I would imagine that the number of girls that need potential services, what you guys provide, there's got to be a bunch of them, huh?
Yes, the need is great because there is not a lot of facilities offering safe housing for adults. There is a number of programs offering services for minors,
right?
But not a whole lot for young adults, and so we are the only program of its kind in Bexar County.
Okay.
And yes, part of our vision for the center is that in the future we can duplicate our program. As an example, duplicate it to another Sunflower Home that can specifically serve male survivors. And then duplicate it again to have a home that can serve moms with babies.
Oh, gotcha.
And another one that can support LGBTQI youth, as an example.
Yeah. I was telling you earlier about a place I used to work there in Driscoll.
Yes.
And one thing that I kind of I wasn't a fan of, I guess, is I told you about the different cottages. And there was a 17-year-old cottage. And when they turned 18, I think they gave them $200.
Wow.
And they let them go. And I remember thinking to myself, at 18, I was still living in my dad's house, for one. But second, when you come from a family that you've had problems with in a childhood that wasn't ideal, so to speak, to living in a facility where they give you education, they give you housing, they give you food, and then you turn 18 and you get $200 and asked to leave. What are your options? So having a facility like yours where there is an option, right? Because you need to have that transition. You're going from having everything provided to you, in this case, having everything provided to you, to having nothing provided for you. You have no I guess limited education, but you have no real access to job training or being able to find a job. And I mean, there's some time there where you've got to also find a place to live. You've got to find employment. You've got to get some paychecks under you so you can learn how, and then just to learn how to be an adult. It was more of a place where they had some therapy. It wasn't quite as long as I think each kid should have gotten. It kind of had its flaws, but at the same time, it was literally, hey, see you later, so.
Yep. It's the reality of a lot of youth that for years they've been under supervision or in the care of the state of Texas or in juvenile detention for years sometimes. And they reach out the age of 18. And that very same day, all the services that they were receiving are gone.
Yeah.
In addition to that, the youth are experiencing complex trauma. They don't have a support system around them. They have little to no social skills. They don't have their GED or their high school. And they are experiencing mental health issues, substance use. But somehow the age of 18 means you're on your own. And the expectation is that they will be able to get a job, find an apartment, pay their own bills, make their own way in the world. But they are not prepared and they don't have the tools to do that. But somehow society expects that they will do that.
Yeah.
But they have no skills, no tools, no support system. And so that's when all the youth that they are aging out of the system, they end up in the street.
Yeah.
They end up re-victimized. They end up using drugs. In a lot of cases, engaging in what we call survival sex in order to pay their bills, because that's the only thing that they know how to do.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't have any other support. And
I
so
would imagine that would also re-trigger any sort of trauma that they had help for, moved beyond, and now they're back in. It's almost like them going back into what you pulled them out of initially, without having that transition, without teaching them those skills to be successful. I mean, when you get to this is just me speculating, but I would imagine when you get to a certain point like that, you would revert to what you've been exposed to.
Oh yeah.
And this is how I need money, so this is what I need to do, and it's just reintroducing them back into that trauma.
That's right. At the same time, in order to cope with horrific things that they are gonna happen to your body, a lot of survivors, they resort to drugs and alcohol. Just to survive the horrific things that they have to go through. And so they also engage in substance use. So that's also an additional issue that they face, right? And also being on the streets is very dangerous. A lot of people die. A lot of people get kidnapped. A lot of girls, they disappear.
Yeah.
They re-enter that sex trafficking trade.
Yeah.
Right. That world.
Mm-hmm. Now earlier we were talking, and the thought for me, and I think for a lot of people, is that sex trafficking happens really far away, right? And when we when we decide to help or we decide to donate to something, it's the mentality is, we're going to send it overseas, or we're going to send it to the border, or we're going to send it, it's not happening, in my neck of the woods. But tell people what the reality of that is.
The reality is that sex trafficking and sexual exploitation of children happens here in our neighborhoods. It happens in our communities. It happens in our city. The girls victims of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation are our neighbors. They attend the same schools that your kids are attending. They live here in the city. This is not an issue that is foreign. Of course it is. There's countries around the world that they are well known for sex trafficking of children. But we're talking about what is happening currently in our communities. For us, we house survivors from San Antonio, girls that they have residency here in Bexar County. We are not opposed to serve a survivor, a foreign survivor, but that just has not been the case for us. In 2022, we provided services to 113 survivors.
Wow. In the Bexar County area? Or?
Yes.
Wow.
Here in Bexar County. And so it's important to remember that this is an issue that we all should be aware and concerned that is happening here in our community. It's important to remember that.
One thing you'd mentioned to me before is, a lot of the thought is, and it does happen, is these are children being brought across the border and they're being smuggled from other countries, but the reality is it's happening in our neighborhoods, in our county, and it's happening not by some coyote or some cartel member, it's happening to young people by their own family members.
Yes. For us at Youth Center, we see a lot of cases of what we call familial trafficking. And that's exactly what you're thinking. A family member facilitated the sexual exploitation or the sex trafficking of the child. It's mind-blowing to think that the person that's supposed to care and love that child is the very same person that is facilitating that victimization. It happens a lot. It's a crime that happened behind closed doors. It's usually in a family unit. Most of the survivors have identified mom as their trafficker. And therefore, mom has also been identified to have a significant addiction to drugs. So all this sexual exploitation happens inside of a home, within family members, facilitating the abuse. The dynamics for sure have changed in recent times. It's no longer the stranger in the alley, right, that is snatching kids and, taking them to across the state lines. It does happen in some situations, but what we see more is all these crimes happening inside of a home within family members. And it's, of course, generational, so it's normalized. It's part of growing up in this family.
Yeah.
Right? It happens to grandma, it happens to mom, so now it's happening to me because it happens to everyone in our family.
I was just fixing to ask you that, if you have, you have multiple people living in the household and they know that that's happening, initially my thought is, well, who's pulling the fire alarm, right? Who's raising the red flag? But when it's, I'm gonna, the word culture is kind of a large word, but I'm gonna use it in the sense of inside of a particular family. When it's that particular family, their culture and their way of doing things, and some, like you said, something they've all experienced. Well, to them, it's no big deal. It's a massive deal, and it's a very big deal.
Oh, yeah.
But they've all done it, and it's or it's all happened to them, That's tough. That's tough because
Yep.
where does that stop, right? You're
Right.
starting to see more and more mothers having children that are being raised by grandparents, you know, and if that mentality's been in that family that long, it's gonna happen to the little ones, you know.
It's
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 terrible.
yeah, it's a real situation. Because what happened in the dynamics of the family is that there is a lot of secrecy around, right? And because it has happened to several different people in the family, it's normalized. It becomes normal. And it occurs more than what you can think.
Yeah.
It's interesting also to talk about how sex trafficking hardly ever starts with an act of violence, right? The dynamics have changed so much that now the perpetrator is known to the victim, is known to the family. It hardly ever starts with an act of violence. What we see in movies sometimes is like kidnapping and guns and drugs and, putting girls in the trunk of a car and driving them across the state lines. And that's a movie.
Yeah.
It doesn't really happen like that. What happens usually in familial cases is the perpetrator starts a grooming process with the child, right? Early on. The perpetrator, they start gaining the confidence and the trust of the child because the perpetrator is known to the family and the child. So the perpetrator has easy access to the child. And so they start giving the child small gifts, being nice with the child, eventually taking the child in outings, being that trusted person for the child. And so that grooming process is the beginning of that sexual abuse. As soon as the perpetrator gets the trust from the child, then they move into the abusing the child. And so it hardly ever starts with an act of violence. Also, it's important to remember that a lot of victims experience trauma bonds with their traffickers.
Explain that.
So
A trauma bond. I mean, I get what that sounds like, but what does that look like, I guess?
it looks like I know it's going to get really, really painful and violent with my trafficker, but at the same time, he's the only person for me. He's the only one that I have. I have no one else in the world. He's the only person that brings me food. He's the only person that says that he loves me. I know it's going to get really ugly because I'm going to get beat up and raped and all kind of things. But the little moments of emotional attachment with my trafficker makes it worth it. Because a big part of the tactics of traffickers, they isolate the victim. I'm the only person that they have that they can depend on for affection, for food, for safety is their trafficker. And so that's also why it's difficult for a victim to leave that relationship with a trafficker.
And I guess that's part of the grooming phase, and and I guess that's also part of the trafficker looking for the right girl, right?
So the right girl is a vulnerable child, someone with incredible vulnerabilities, a runaway, someone coming from a broken home, someone with incarcerated parents, someone that has a financial need, girls that they are just looking to belong, looking for community, looking for a group, right? Perpetrators, they specifically look for that type of kids. Someone that is incredibly in need of emotional affection or financial needs, someone that really, really needs that emotional attachment. And so initially, the trafficker offers all of that to the victim. That's the recruitment part, right? They initially start, in some cases, we call the Romeo a trafficker. So it starts as friends, and then boyfriend and girlfriend. They take the victim out to the movies and a dinner, give her gifts. They treat it as a relationship, right? This is my girlfriend. This is my boyfriend. But it's all part of the recruitment, right? Again, all the way until the trafficker gains the trust of the victim. And then the trafficker moves into, well, if you love me, you're going to have sex with these friends of mine. Or if you love me, you're going to do sex work because we need money for the bills. And so they start now moving into the sexual exploitation of the girls.
And that's what you were talking about earlier. You were talking about the difference between trafficking and exploitation.
Right.
And that's more along the lines of exploitation, right? It's being manipulative. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily being physical as far as threatening, but it's more of, hey, I've done all this for you. If you care about us as much as I care about us, you'll do these things.
Because of the trauma bond, right? At that point, the victim has a relationship in a bond with the trafficker.
Yeah.
And so they comply. The sexual exploitation, recently I was reading an article with the number one commodity for sexual exploitation is shelter.
Yeah.
And you can think about how many young adults are currently unhoused here in San Antonio. And so each one of them are a perfect prey for sexual exploitation, because the number one commodity is shelter.
Yeah.
I will let you sleep in my couch, but you need to do all of this. It's not even money. People oftentimes think, oh yeah, there's exchange of big wads of money, and no. The sexual exploitation happens in exchange of a place to sleep, a plate of food, safety. It happens, drugs, it happens like that. There's not really an exchange of money.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess to a young person who doesn't have a place to go, a couch and a meal, that's a lot.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But those are your basic needs.
Sure.
Right? And yeah, that's how perpetrators, they abuse the kids, because they see the need. I can meet the need, right? The traffickers, I can meet your need. I can give you a plate of food, and I can give you a couch to spend the night. I can get you off the streets. That's how they move into exploiting the kids. I can meet that need, but eventually this is the price, and this is the things that you have to do for me.
Now, once they have a child under control like that, and they've been groomed, they've been manipulated, do they use those same children to I guess bring new kids in, maybe through school, maybe through socializing or social media? Do they use those young girls to bring in new young girls, I guess?
For traffickers, they most commonly use, I don't know if you have heard this term, the bottom girl. Mm-mm. So if trafficker has a group of girls, right, they identified one of the girls that is a little bit more, is hustling more, and is a little bit more, I guess, street smart.
Gotcha.
Right? And so they identified her in that world. They call her a bottom girl. And so now she's in charge. Not just of the recruitment, but also to supervise the other girls. And that is probably, it's really, really sad, something like that happening, because that is actually a survival. The bottom girl is literally trying to survive. So if I can choose me being constantly raped or somebody else, I'm probably gonna let somebody else go through all of that. It's a survival tool, and it's sad. It's sad that that the girls, they have to find themselves in that situation to survive horrific things, right? You have to make that choice. Hey, it's gonna be the other girls. It's no longer gonna be me. Sadly, when oftentimes you see those girls being treated as also traffickers and arrested and prosecuted, when in reality they started as victims and they were forced into making those difficult choices. But to go back to your question, yes. That's why sex trafficking is so hard to eliminate, because there is always somebody else looking and recruiting for others, right?
That is something that, to me, it's we talked about Christianity and the devil, and that's very demonic, to be that manipulative, to take advantage of people that terribly, I think it's on a scale that most of us, we don't think about. We go about our lives and we go to work and we, take care of our families, and, before you know it, a day went by, a month went by, a year went by, and, you don't take into consideration what's happening to other children, what's happening to other people. I think when people take a minute to think about it, it angers you, right? Mm-hmm. How can it not? It's gonna blows your mind, But to be able to, it needs to be something that people are constantly thinking about and constantly aware of, because the act of pursuing these kids, the act of manipulating these kids, the act of, selling them to the sex traffickers, that's happening daily, and it's scary, because like in the other podcast that I did where we talked with Victor, it's when we're sitting here having this conversation and I'm thinking about it, and it's mind blowing, the scale of what's going on. It's to the point where it's like, you want to say, how do you fix it? But at the same time, it's like, well, where do you start? There's facilities like yours that help. There's other people that are trying to catch these folks, and that's all great work. But it seems like the size of the problem is massive. Yep. It's not to say what people are doing about it is insignificant, but it feels like it's a drop in the bucket compared to the issue, the major issue,
Yes.
And part of me feels like, if we were just paying more attention to it, and you describing what goes on and how, I'm sitting there and thinking about all these things that I would see in a young person, their changes, their, them detaching from, their family or their friends, or being more isolated, or being more secretive. These are all signs of something's going on, and I think as an adult, a lot of times you give your kid the tablet, you give them their cell phone, the excuse is always, he's always on his phone, or she's always on her phone. And it's like, well, what's on her phone? What is she looking at? Who's she talking to? People want to, I give my kid some freedom. And it's like, there's a difference between giving your kids some freedom and giving them some responsibility. But at the same time, I think as an adult, as a parent, as an aunt or an uncle, there's nothing wrong with knowing what they're looking at. Yeah. Who are you talking to? Is it other kids? Is it appropriate? And I think we kind of got in this weird place. My parents were nosy. They wanted to know what we were doing, what we were listening to. I remember I had a cassette that it was a Guns N' Roses cassette that had some crazy artwork on the front, and they took it.
Yeah.
because they were worried about it. Was it a problem? Not really. But at the same time, it was them paying attention to what we were doing. Now, they missed a lot. I guarantee you that, because we did a lot of stuff behind the back. But, as a parent, as an adult, I feel like it's even more important now to know who your kid's texting and what they're texting about or what their social media is doing.
Yes.
No kid should have a locked phone that their parents can't get into, because the consequences are they're too high.
I tell people, all the trafficker needs is a phone. That's all he needs, or she. There's also women that traffic other women or kids. All the trafficker needs is a phone. That's it.
I guess they come through apps. They come through text.
Oh, yeah. You saw it recently where a girl from Texas ended up in another state with apparently another 14-year-old kid that she met on one of those apps. And he was a growing old man. Yeah.
Oh, he was lying to her to get her.
Mm-hmm. And so the reality is that you don't know who you are chatting with. You don't know anything about the person in your phone. Like, you don't know.
Yeah.
But kids nowadays are so desperately looking for connection. They're so desperately looking for someone to talk to, belong to something, to connect with others, especially after the pandemic, right? When kids, they lose that social connection and that one-on-one in-person interaction with others. So young kids are looking for that.
Yeah.
Right? And perpetrators, they know that. And so they present themselves, like I said before. You have a need, I can meet that need.
Yeah.
Perpetrators are the biggest con artists, right? They are sociopaths, and they identify that need on the child, and they're like, oh, I'm going to meet that need. And the kids, they don't know that. They are not aware that that's happening. It's important that we, as adults, we are more aware and more vigilant, right? Because it's all of us responsibility to protect our kids. Our place, Youth Center of Texas, will not exist, right? If we had protected all of our survivors.
Sure.
And so this is the end result of child sexual abuse. Kids that the system failed to protect them. So this is the end result, right? That's why we have residents. Because those are kids that went through the system and the system failed to support them and provide a safe place for them. So they end up in sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, and then they end up in facilities like ours.
What percentage, I don't know if you'll know the answer, but what percentage of children that are sex trafficked, what's the percentage of people who escape that compared to, I guess, the percentage of children that are sex trafficked? Is it high? Is there a lot of kids that get out of it, or is it just not very many kids that make it out of it?
I just don't think that this is an issue that has been researched.
Gotcha.
Because this is what happened. Normally, a child that is missing, right? Oh, he's a runaway. Oh, he's a problem kid. Oh, he's trouble. He just went with a boyfriend. Oh, that's most of the times what society thinks about that.
So we've mislabeled what's actually happened to that kid.
Yep, exactly. It's like, oh, he's trouble. He disappears and runs away all the time, and then he comes back, or simply nobody is looking for that kid because parents are absent, parents are incarcerated, parents are not in the picture. And so nobody's really looking for that kid. There is a strong link and a strong correlation between children in foster care who end up victims of sex trafficking. A high number of children in foster care, once they enter the foster care system, there is a correlation on the children experiencing sex trafficking.
So foster parents are sex trafficking these kids?
Not necessarily, but you think about a child that...
Oh, I see. They maybe not necessarily the foster parent, but they end up through the other means that we talked about earlier. Gotcha.
Yeah, because you talk about the trauma that children in foster care experience. They don't belong to anyone. Nobody wants them. Nobody cares what happened to them. They are in a strange place, in a strange home. They don't know who they're living with. They're dealing with a lot. They go to a new school. They're moved from place to place, from city to city, from town to town. So think about how many vulnerabilities those kids have.
Yeah.
And this is specifically what traffickers look for. Oh, you're having a hard time at home. Nobody wants you. Well, we want you.
Yeah.
We welcome you. We accept you. We are meeting your need. And so I believe that that's why there is a strong correlation between those two.
It's scary because a lot of these kids are coming from a broken situation. And so their alternative, it's almost like there isn't an alternative. You know, earlier when we were talking, you were talking about, you know, mothers being the ones trafficking the children. And, you know, when I grew up as a kid, you know, my dad had his issues, but I guess when I came along, he'd straightened a lot of that out, you know. And so for me, I always tell people my dad and my mother always provided a home, right? It's an old rundown house, but it was still a place to go, right? Yeah. And it allowed me an opportunity to go out and try and venture out to do new things. And if I was unsuccessful, I knew I could always come back home. But when you're a kid coming from one of these situations, a home isn't, for one, home may be the place that this is happening.
Right.
You know, and for others, home's not much better.
That's right. I have talked to kids that they say, Miss, I'd rather be on the street than at home because horrible things are happening to me at home. I'd rather be on the street. I feel safer in the street, if you can believe that. See, kids, they don't run away because they are a problem kid or they are trouble. They run away because they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
That's why they run away, because they do not feel safe where they are at.
Yeah. And I think it's easy for us to kind of label the kid instead of the situation. That's because it's easier, right? It's easy for me to go, hey, Adriana's she's just a bad girl.
She's a problem kid, yeah.
Instead of me trying to wonder, well, you know, my wife is a special needs teacher. And she always says behavior is communication.
That's right.
You know, and I think when you sit there and you think about that, you start to look at behavior differently. You start going, you know, Adriana's not just a bad girl. You know, why is she doing this?
That's right.
Know? And when you look a little deeper, which takes effort, and maybe takes you getting a little uncomfortable, you start to realize what those issues might be.
Yes, so it's important to keep in mind that kids react. What you see in the behaviors is a reaction to what is happening around them.
Yeah.
And kids, certainly, they do communicate through behaviors. And so we need to be aware of that. I think if you show interest in getting to know a lot of the kids that they are going through situations like that, you will be surprised. For the most part, they're just like any other kid. like the girls that we house at the center. They're like any other girls that age. They want the same thing. They like the same kind of music. They want the same kind of clothes. They want a phone. They're just like any other kid that age.
Yeah.
They're not different, right? Many times, community partners have drop-off girls with us, right? And a couple times, some partners have said, hey, just FYI, as soon as we leave, she's probably going to run. And I'm like, okay. But for me, if youth center is a safe place and a safe shelter for the girls, I know they're not going to run away.
Yeah.
We have never had a girl running away from our place. In fact, when we are ready to transition them into independent living, a lot of them, they don't want to leave. Because for the first time, they feel safe.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why kids, they run from place to place because they don't feel safe. And because they're being abused. So it's also important to keep that in mind because it's easy to judge all these young kids that they are on the streets today.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to downtown, there is a lot of young adults. And I'm talking about the 18 to 24, 18, 22, 24. There's a lot of kids that age are out on the streets. But that tells you also a story. They don't feel safe. They have not found that safety place where they can just feel safe and accepted and they can get the help that they need. They literally don't have a place like that. So that's why they're on the street. It's easy to judge and say, well, you are lazy. Well, you enjoy doing drugs. That's why you're on the streets. You know, people come up with all these conclusions about it. I specifically have sit down with many of the survivors that we serve at the center and ask them, hey, I know you've been in facilities and juvenile detention and CPS, you've been all kind of places. I know you have talked to a lot of people and counselors. Has anybody has ever sit down with you and asked you what happened to you? No.
How can, and this is kind of a rhetorical question, I guess, but I don't know how you can try and provide assistance to anybody without first finding out what happened to them.
Yep.
You know, I mean, it's, and maybe it's like a lot of, and not that it's an excuse, but maybe it's like a lot of places where just things are overwhelmed.
Yep.
You know, departments are overwhelmed. I was telling you about the place I worked in, in Driscoll, and you know, it always blew my mind because not therapy, but I guess sitting with a counselor was 15 minutes of Coke and a bag of chips, you know. And I would go home and I would tell people, I said, you know, I'm a tutor, I'm a counselor, I'm a big brother, you know. And like I told you, I was 20, you know, and I was 20, and I wasn't equipped to sit with these kids and hear their story and give them advice. I would try to, maybe naively, you know, but my advice to them was more of a brotherly type advice, because I'm not equipped to tell a kid who's been sexually abused by, you know, like I told you, one was sexually abused by his mother, or by grown men for food. His mom was doing it.
Yep.
You know, and it's like, what do you tell a kid, you know, when you're 20, you know, because he only got 15 minutes. Yeah. You can't help somebody when you're just doing it like that. There needs to be more. There needs to be more time, more discussion. You know, I mean, sometimes it gets so bad, the only thing I can think to tell somebody is, there's just some really bad people. You didn't do anything wrong. You know, I mean, it's... Yeah,
it's definitely true that it's easy to get discouraged working in the anti-trafficking space. It's easy to get discouraged, right? Because you see a greater number of survivors than for us what the number that we can help.
Yeah.
Right? There's not enough resources. There's not enough safe places for them to go. And so it's easy to get discouraged. At the same time, the reason I love our mission in the purpose of the center is because it's a very specialized and unique place. We are specifically working with the population, and we have a holistic approach. We are also a program, we don't have a limit of time that a survivor can be with us. We have had survivors staying with us for 13 months. And so I love our program because now it has become more of a specialized, very unique, individualized program. And so I love that about our program, and I hope that we can duplicate our program in the future.
So when you get somebody and you intake them, what is, I guess, how does that transition work? Like, they come to you guys. I mean, I would imagine at some point there's some therapy. I'd imagine at some point there's some. Do you jump into that right away? Do you let them get settled in?
Right.
How do you build rapport with these girls? Because they're going to need it, right? I mean, you said you have a 0 runaway rate. You know, you've obviously done a good job of building rapport with these girls, that they feel safe and comfortable, and that they're not going to leave.
Yeah.
You know, how does that happen for you guys?
It's a process. It's important to mention that the foundation of our program is the trust-based relational intervention, TBRI. This is an evidence-based approach that has been very effective for residential facilities that they are working with at-risk youth. And it has also been used more recently with survivors of sex trafficking. So the trust-based relational intervention is that. The foundation of our program is building that trust back. Initially, when we admit a survivor, the survivor goes to a stabilization period that can be up to 90 days. And initially, what we do is build that trust relationship back with the client by engaging her in conversation, providing a safe space for her to sleep, covering her basic needs, food, hot water to drink, medical needs, anything that is a basic need, right? We want to cover that. Our goal is that initially the survivor will feel safe, not just safe in her own body, right? But also safe in the space. So we spend a lot of time developing that connection in that relationship with client. When you think about sex trafficking, is betrayal, right? These are survivors, young girls that every single person that they have come across has betrayed them, lied to them, sell them. They don't trust anyone. They do not trust anyone. And so we are not expecting for them to come into the facility and trust us, right? They don't know who I am. And so it takes time. That's why the program is a long-term program, because just to start building that relationship to the point where the survivor is talking to you, talking just in conversation. I'm not even talking about therapy, just talking, right? Expressing their needs. It takes time. For us, it takes maybe up to 90 days. That's 3 months.
Yeah.
The main thing we do is just engage the survivor, provide physical safety, space, safety in the space that they are in, basic needs. And it's important for us during that time to be consistent and to be fully present, and to also have proper boundaries, just to be there for the survivor. but it takes time. That initial process of stabilization takes time. Once they complete the stabilization period, then we can move into individual counseling, more in depth, right?
And that takes place on site, or do
Yep.
y'all take them? Okay.
Yeah, we have an amazing partnership with UTSA, the counseling department, and so we have counselor interns at the
Okay.
center. They are the interns are usually under my supervision. I'm a licensed professional counselor myself, and so so that was one of our goals, to offer that counseling on site, rather than sending the person with somebody that may not have the expertise, right? Sex trafficking has existed
Sure.
since the beginning of time, right?
Right.
But here's the thing, there's not a lot of research on it. There is not a lot of information about it. And there is also a lot of mental health professionals and advocates, that in case managers, service providers in general, they don't know what to do with sex trafficking cases. They just don't know. It's not a specialized field that, oh yeah, I went to,
Sure,
a school and I specialize on that.
Right.
In my case, I acquire my experience and skills from the very same clients that I work with. My very first interaction with victims of human trafficking was several years ago, when I was working at the shelter in Corpus Christi.
Well, you said you've been in this, 17 years now?
So initially, when I was working at the women's shelter in Corpus Christi, I was the unofficial staff to work with victims of human trafficking, because I am bilingual. Spanish is my first language.
Yeah.
And all the clients that we will see in Corpus Christi were from Mexico, Central and South America, victims of human trafficking. And so somehow I ended up with that caseload because I was able to communicate with them in Spanish. That's how I started working in the anti-trafficking space.
Yeah.
Not because I specialize and at that time, I was a victim's advocate. I was not even a counselor.
Yeah.
I was just starting my career in social services. But somehow they started sending me all those clients to me. And so that's how I started working in the space. And so throughout the years, I have learned, but really from the clients that I have served, there is not a lot of resources available, specifically for sex trafficking survivors and for service providers.
Your teachers have been the victims.
That's right. Yes, and I'm very humble and very, just very humble to appreciate it with all of our clients, that they have trusted me and they have shared their stories with me. Because every time I get the opportunity to talk to a survivor, I also experience internal growth and learning. And even when you hear the most sadness, devastating, awful things, it also helps me to become more aware and to also continue serving other survivors.
I think what, or me and a lot of people are naive in, is there's a limit to what our brain can fathom, right?
Yes.
Where I'm imagining you getting started, and there's got to be a time where you're being introduced to some of the worst things that can happen to a person, and I think it's crazy because that's not something your typical John Q. public wants to be exposed to, right?
Right.
But the reality is that it does happen, and I think those things are important for people to understand, that things outside of what you're capable of digesting happens to people, and we need to be more aware of that. And we need to allocate more time, more funds, more attention to that aspect of what happens to innocent people,
Yeah.
you know, and that's part of the ugliness of this is you know, it shouldn't happen to anybody, but it's happening to people who are already victims of something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's adding on to things that they've experienced.
Yep. I think last year in our impact report, which I put a copy on that folder for you, 87% of the survivors that we served last year reported having been victims of child sexual abuse. 87%. So you can tell that there is also a strong correlation there.
Yeah.
So, but it's important also, besides everything that you mentioned, to also be more empathetic, right? The population that we serve has a great stigma on it. Some people think that, oh, well, the girls, they have a choice, or they were just doing the sex work because they wanted to. Nobody does that because they want to. No one will choose to do that because they want to. They're being forced. And also keeping in mind also that they were minors at the time. Nobody can consent to any type of sexual activity under the age of 18 in the state of Texas.
Well, I mean, like you just said, 87% were actually just little children, you know?
Yep. So I think we also, as a society, we have also lost a lot of empathy, right? Well, those are just foster kids. Well, those are runaways. Well, those are kids on the streets. Those are trouble kids. We label kids in so many different ways, right? And we need to become more empathetic. Hey, there is a story with each one of those kids. There is a need. They have been harmed in horrible ways. But we hardly ever take the time to really sit down with one of those kids and say, hey, what happened? What happened to you? What's going on? What's your story? Nobody has ever taken the time, because they're usually caught, sent to facilities, sent to juvenile detention, put on meds, sent to rehab, another facility, foster care, back and forth. But nobody has ever sit down and say, hey, what's your story? What's going on with you? What happened?
Do you guys offer, as part of your program, do you guys offer anything that gives the girls an opportunity to feel productive? Whether it's crafts or whether it's learning a trade or whether it's some sort of job skills or something? Is there, because I think with everything that happens at some point,
yep.
You know, we were talking about Driscoll, right? And I'd always end up with the kids that were the handful, right? And one thing that I found was giving them, I'll give you an example. There was one kid that, he's probably 30 now, so I'll just use his name Lupe. And so Lupe would always wanted to fight. Lupe always wanted to cause trouble. He's always cussing, wouldn't listen to anybody. And I remember one day I was like, he reminded me a lot of people I grew up with and maybe a little bit of me. But I remember I would tell Lupe, hey, Lupe, we're going to need to go move something off a trailer. And he would say, no, I don't want to go. I'm like, and I would tell him, I need your help, right? And so he'd make a face and he'd moan and groan and he'd come with me. Right. And so we'd take stuff off the trailer, we'd get done, and I would slap him on the side of the arm and say, hey, thanks, Lupe, and I'd leave. I'd leave him alone. Later on, he would say, hey, what are we going to do today? And I'd say, well, there's some branches we need to move. You want to go move branches? I could use some help. Yeah, I'll come help you. And then slowly we'd go move branches. I'd get him a drink and a bag of chips. Thanks, Lupe. And I'd leave him alone. And I noticed his attitude changed when he had something to do. Mm-hmm. Because at a certain point, You know, there's trauma that you've experienced, there's things that you're going through, but at some point you want to feel productive and
That's
useful.
Right. Yep.
What do you guys do to help with that?
So our framework of services covers 6 different domains, and one of those domains is educational / vocational, right? So we connect our clients with different community partners, whether that's workforce, next level, many different groups that we work with. And so we always encourage our clients, to finish their GED. I think that has become priority for us. Whether they do it online, they go back to school, they do it with any different program. There's many different options for them to choose from. And so that's the first thing that we encourage them. Hey, finish your GED, finish your high school diploma. Any survivor that is in our program either has to be enrolled in a school or has to have a job. If for some reason, medical issues, they cannot do neither one of them, they have to volunteer. But we try to get them engaged. I will say the vast majority of our clients have jobs. That is one of the biggest goals of the program, because we cannot fully transition them into their own apartment
if they can't afford it.
Until they have secured a job, right? And they can pay their bills. Because they get assistance, of course, from the rapid rehousing, but they have to pay bills. They may not have to pay rent for several months, but they have to pay bills and their food also. And so it's important for us that they do that. I will say that all of our clients are open to work. It is difficult and challenging at the beginning, because when they come to the center, they don't have an ID. They don't have a social security card. They may have a criminal history. They may be in probation or parole. And so it's a little bit difficult at times to navigate through all of that. But our staff supports them in the process. And I will say that all of our clients are open to do that. We like to start with the GED, really, before we get into the re-entry into the workforce.
I'd imagine that's a goal. I would imagine that's a goal too. And when they achieve that, that's something that's a positive success, right?
Yeah, it's also something that I don't think that nobody ever in their lives encouraged them to pursue education. So they just they haven't been attending a school for years at a time. Most of our clients, they have dropped in 9th, 10th grade. Yeah. And so they haven't been attending a school for several years at a time. But that's important for us. And so we do our best to accommodate our clients. I know our case managers, they have different options for different programs. We even have one survivor finish her high school diploma, and she's currently attending St. Philip's College.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Which is close to the center.
Great.
So yeah, we do have some survivors that they go further than that in their education. Some of them, they finish their GED and they're like, no, I want to have a job. I want to pay my own bills and I want to transition. Okay, that's fine too. Yeah.
What is some of the most difficult, I guess, portions of y'all's program that people have a hard time with? Is it the opening up the therapy? I wouldn't think the GED and the vocational portion, once you start feeling good about being successful and doing something positive, I mean, these are young women that have probably been told they're only worth this. And for them to start accomplishing things through you guys, but on their own, I mean, there's got to be a lot of success in that. But I guess, is it just the initial trying to get them to open up, or is it therapy, or what's the most difficult portion for those girls?
I think it takes time for them to trust us. It just takes time.
Yeah.
It takes consistency, and for us to show up and being fully present every time we interact with clients. for us to be authentic and genuine and fully present, right? To develop that relationship with our clients. I think something that can be challenging is that it takes time to rebuild all those connections. You're talking about young women that they had been abused for years and years and years. And so it's unrealistic to expect that in 90 days they're going to be a different person.
Right.
That's what is challenging sometimes for people to understand. Also, our program is very unique because it's a small bed capacity, right? Because we are very individualized in long term. You can help survivors with a 30-day stay.
Yeah. It's not an assembly line fix. You have to dedicate to each one.
It takes a very, very long time. I have worked with survivors that they did not engage in counseling with me until about 6 months from the first time I met them at the center. Of course, we were chatting and talking, but fully engaging in counseling, it took me about 6 months because it's not easy.
Yeah.
And so I think that can be challenging, the time that we often explain to people, hey, this is a long process. Also, these are young women that they are going to have to receive counseling services most likely for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
It's a long process.
With a lot of the abuse for a lot of these girls coming from family members, direct family members, do you guys get involved at all? Or because at the end of the day, my dad's my dad, my mom's my mom, my siblings are my siblings, right? So I'm thinking about these folks. For a lot of them, they're never going to abandon that connection completely with maybe the people that abuse them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys help facilitate that, or is that something they do on their own after they've made progress with you guys? What have you seen as far as people, I guess, re-engaging with their family members? Maybe not necessarily the one that actually abused them, mm-hmm. but maybe the ones that were in the room or in the house, you know? I mean, there's still that portion of it, right? At a certain point,
oh yeah,
you have to address the very beginning.
It's hard to address it at times because the vast majority of survivors, they don't have the understanding that mom committed a crime.
Mm.
Their understanding most of the times is, I was taking care of my mom. I was helping the family.
Wow. Wow.
So it's hard. It requires a lot of psychoeducation to really, really present information to the survivors and maybe make a connection, right? Because I was helping my mom. I was taking care of her. I was helping my family. So it's really hard to change that. What I do with a lot of clients is two truths can coexist, right? The truth is that your mom failed to protect you, allowed for other people to abuse you. That's the truth. But the other truth that can coexist with that one is, it is also true that your mom loves you. That you are the child that belongs to your mom. That you are hers. That you are family.
That's heavy. That's heavy to digest.
It is heavy. I will support my clients when they said, hey, I do want to talk to my mom. Hey, how can I support you? Because here's the thing. We all have a natural need for a mom and our dad. It's who belong to. It's a connection. You can get rid of that.
Yeah.
It's a natural need that we all have. We want to have a relationship and a connection with the person that we come from, that we belong to. It's a natural thing. But the two truths can coexist.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. When you're talking to a client and they've come to the conclusion and have accepted both of those, that my mom loves me, but my mom abused me.
Mm-hmm.
They get ready to meet their mom, and their mom does not acknowledge that she did something wrong. Is that something that can push a client backwards? Or is that, or have that you've seen, have they been able to just say, she's not going to see it differently, she's still my mom, I've learned that I did nothing wrong?
Right.
Or is that something that can push a client backwards? And because it's important for a person as a victim to have, I guess, the person that victimized them acknowledge that they did something wrong. But if you've got a mother that same thing happened to her, same thing happened to her mom, that person may not have gone through the same sort of therapeutical services that this lady has, but for her to be able to acknowledge that, and because that's a lot for somebody to say, hey, I did this to you and I'm sorry. It's easier for somebody to not acknowledge it, and in turn tells the victim, hey, I'm not acknowledging that I did something wrong to you,
I think initially it will derail the progress that we have been able to achieve in counseling. Because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. And I think initially the survivor feels prepared, feels ready, right? But it will certainly have an effect, a negative effect on the progress that we had made in counseling. But nevertheless, my commitment is to continue supporting my client, right? And I think initially it can be difficult. The healing comes over time, right? Because over time, as the person matures, learns more in counseling, practices more of those skills that she acquired in counseling, finds a good support system, you can see healing happening over time, where then the acceptance happens. Hey, my mom is just my mom. She's not going to change. She's not going to talk about what happened. But my mom is just my mom. And I think it comes some acceptance at the end of that process. But it's a long process, and it's a lot of internal work that the person has to do, right? Yeah.
It's important work, because if it's not done, it happens to another generation.
That's right. That's right. A lot of the work that we do at the center is also, we specifically work with survivors that they are pregnant or they are parenting. And we provide more education to them as far as the red flags of child sexual abuse, the dynamics of unhealthy relationships, the cycle of violence. And then we also provide parenting classes for them. Because also our goal is that they are the ones that they are breaking that cycle, right? That their children are not going to experience any of that. But like I said before, a lot of survivors, they don't even recognize that what happened to them was a crime. They don't even put sex trafficking together to that. They were like, no, I was abused, or yeah, people took advantage of me, but they don't see it as a crime, right? And so it takes a lot of education with our clients to educate them and to also show them, how those dynamics happen, to create more awareness. So hopefully the cycle ends right there with them.
Yeah. And I guess that brings us back to the beginning, where it's a massive problem. Mm-hmm. What do you do about it? And I guess you start with education.
Yep.
It's one thing to be trafficked and physically be forced, through violence or threat. It's another one to know that you're being manipulated, because that's your tool to fight against that. Is to understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. That way you recognize the threat and you can hopefully avoid it. Ooh.
Yep. We have to educate our children, our grandchildren. We have to talk to them about the dangers that they're outside with, online grooming, what that looks like, because there is a lot of that out there. But if you and I, we are adults, that we are oblivious to what is happening, we don't want to hear it, we don't want to know. Oh yeah, it happened somewhere else. It's not happening to me. So why should I care about it? We need to educate ourselves, so that way we can educate our children and our grandchildren and our nieces and nephews. But it starts with us. We are the adults here. We can educate ourselves better. There is a lot of groups in San Antonio, like Ransom Life. They do amazing prevention and education work. They specifically go to schools and churches and groups, and they talk about the red flags and the recruitment and all those vulnerabilities of the children. But we need to educate ourselves more. We need to do that so we can educate our children and be more aware.
What is some advice that you would give parents? I guess advice in other things to look for, things that we've already talked about, things to look for. The advice in, I guess, I've always had this little saying that I like to say. I like to say you avoid a confrontation by avoiding a situation, right? And maybe things of that nature. It's hard for somebody to say, I'm married, I have a wife, or I have a husband, I have a child. To think that your brother would do that to your kid, is, for most people, that's not even in the ballpark, right?
Right.
But at the same time, it happens. What is some advice you would give parents to look out for, maybe, I guess, or just things that they can do with their kids to make them aware of the potential hazards or potential manipulation that they might encounter? And tell people at what age that happens at. A lot of us will sit there and go, oh, I don't have to worry about it, my kid's only 6.
No.
Because people are thinking, well, I have to be careful when they start going out with their friends and they're 14 and they're going to the movies.
No.
What is some advice you would give people?
So we need to educate our children. We need to talk to them about their body parts. What is appropriate touching? What is good touching? What is bad touching? What certain areas of your body somebody can touch, and what are some areas that nobody can touch except you? It's important to talk about that, because what happens when a child is sexually abused, the child literally doesn't know what's happening.
Right.
They just know they feel uncomfortable, they feel afraid, they feel disgust, but they don't know what is happening to them because nobody has ever told them. And so it's important that we educate our kids. And in counseling, when I was working with little ones, we always use the bathing suit. The parts where you have your bathing suit, your trunks or your bathing suit for the girls, those are the parts that are off limits, right? Also, we need to...
Well, I think that taking that another further, explaining to your kid, it's not just that your parts are off limit, other people's parts are off limits to you.
That's right. An adult body. It's also important to educate our children that they can talk to you, right? Be available to your children. Be present. Spend time with them. I think nowadays people are so busy that kids are kind of like educating themselves with TikTok, right? It's important to spend more time with the kids and talk to them. Hey, you can talk to me, if a situation like this happens, somebody touches you, somebody does this, somebody makes anything uncomfortable, makes you feel uncomfortable, come and talk to me. Because I think a lot of the abuse that happen within families, there is a lot of secretive things happening, right? I have worked with survivors that they are like, yeah, my grandpa was like always touching me. And the first time I told my mom was like, don't ever say that again. That's your grandpa. Don't ever, ever, ever repeat that to anyone. You're going to destroy this family. You are going to send poor grandpa to jail, and he's like 90 years old. You can't be doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not believing your children happens a lot, especially when we talk about family. Don't say that about your uncle. How dare you say that about your grandpa? And so that remains in secret, and grandpa is still molesting kids.
Yeah.
Because nobody has ever said anything about it, right? It's that secretive, and the secrecy is what bonds the perpetrator and the victim.
It's a secret.
It's a secret. And so that happens a lot in family units, right? Don't say that about grandpa. Don't say that about your brother. We need to change that, right? Most recently, don't make a kid sit on grandpa's lap if he's crying and he doesn't want to. Don't do that. Listen to your kids. If your kid feels uncomfortable because grandpa is like kissing him or something like that, don't do it. Listen to your kids. People oftentimes ignore kids because they're kids. Oh, he's just a kid. Oh, he's just, a little one. Oh, he doesn't know because he's little. No, kids, they know. They just don't have the vocabulary to say what they're feeling.
Yeah.
They don't have the words, but they cry. They have behaviors that tell you that they feel uncomfortable. So I think it's important also to be observant of our kids. How is my kid reacting like this when we are forcing him to sit on grandpa's lap? Because he feels uncomfortable. Don't do it.
Yeah.
We need to spend more time seeing and being around our kids.
That goes back to the behaviors communication.
Yep.
Adriana, I really appreciate you coming and talking about this. I think it's a topic that I've paid attention to for a while, and I find it stressful. Me and my wife didn't have children, but I look around and I see it happening more and more. After we had that phone conversation initially,
Yep.
I think the week after there was 3 or 4 Amber Alerts.
Yes.
And all I could think about after talking to you was, initially I was like, oh, some dad wants time with his kid. What does the car look like, and what was the license plate? I'll keep an eye out. After talking to you, I was like, that's another potential,
Yeah.
Child fixing to be trafficked. And I think that that's something that needs to be on the forefront of people's minds. Kids are being targeted more and more and
Yes.
more. And I don't. I don't know if it's more as in quantity. Maybe I'm paying attention more as an adult. I don't know, but it's got to be something that gets addressed, and if it doesn't get addressed early.
Yeah, like I always tell people, like, why should you care about the clients that we serve, right? The 18 to 22. Well, you should care because they're the next generation. Mm-hmm. Those are your nurses, your attorneys, your doctors, your governors, your state representatives. That's our next generation.
Yeah.
That's why you should care about it, right? They are important in removing the stigma from any young adult that has experienced sexual exploitation, sex trafficking. Removing the stigma. That was not their choice. They did not consent to that. A crime was committed upon them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, I think, like you said earlier, keeping things a secret because you don't want to tear the family apart. And it's like that's the only one you're protecting is the one committing the crime. Mm-hmm. You're doing nothing for the victim. You're doing nothing for potential future victims. Mm-hmm. I mean, I get how stressful that is. I get how difficult that is. But the only one being protective is the person doing wrong.
Yes, and remember that you and our responsibility is to protect our children. Yeah. Right? They are the priority. We should be first and most of all protecting our children.
Yeah. Adriana.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was a very good conversation.
You're with the Youth Center Texas here in San Antonio?
Yes. If anybody wants to know more about the work that we're currently doing with survivors of sex trafficking, please visit our website, www.youthcentertexas.org. We also have our phone number, 210-417-5077.
And that's 24-hour hotline?
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making the trip, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
Watch out for each other.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.